open ocean covers more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface. Deeper than Everest is high, it's the last frontier and is still largely unexplored. Yet it is one of the richest environments. Home to the greatest diversity of life on this planet. From some of the largest creatures ever to live, to the most graceful and the most feared. Humanity has a long history of exploiting the ocean's generous harvest. We've come to depend on the oceans to always provide, and we assume it always will. But we're only just beginning to understand our impact on the environment. The world's ever-increasing population, with an insatiable appetite, puts a growing pressure on our oceans. This means uncertainty for some species and the endangered list for others. High on that list is the Southern Bluefin Tuna. Coveted as a delicacy in Japan, a single fish can sell for thousands at auction. And the increasing demand drove us to fish them right to the brink. However, the tide has turned. This is the amazing story of how fishing actually saved the Southern Bluefin Tuna. I'm McGlashan. Ever since I was a kid, when my father first took me fishing, I've been obsessed. But I've been lucky enough to turn that passion into my career as a writer, photojournalist, ambassador for sustainable fishing, and most importantly, an angler. I've had some amazing memories on the water with my dad, but one fish that always eluded us was the Southern Bluefin Tuna. But we never did it together. I never saw a Southern Bluefin Tuna. It was as though they'd completely vanished. Of the 3 species of bluefin tuna, the Southern Bluefin Tuna, or SBT, has a uniquely inspiring story, and it's one in which Australia plays a key role. SBT can weigh in excess of 200 kilos or 440 pounds and measure more than 2 metres or 6.5 feet in length. A slow-growing fish, it will be a decade before they reach maturity. But they can live up to 40 years, and in their time, they'll embark on one of the greatest migrations on the planet. After spawning in the waters between northwestern Australia and Java, the bluefin travel down Australia's west coast before splitting, some cutting a path into the Great Australian Bight, then around Tasmania and on into the Pacific Ocean, while the rest make their way towards the southern Indian Ocean, all the way to South Africa and even on into the Atlantic Ocean, before eventually returning to Java, the only known spawning ground. The Southern Bluefin Tuna is an amazing fish. They're actually endothermic, which means they're partially warm-blooded, like you and me. So unlike almost any other pelagic fish, they can regulate their core body temperature, making them more efficient hunters able to venture into colder waters than any other tuna, as they travel from ocean to ocean on their epic journey throughout the Southern Hemisphere. They're sprinters built for speed. With a sleek profile, they can reach speeds topping 75 kilometres an hour or 47 miles per hour, making them a legendary fighting fish, highly prized among the game fishing community. Look at that for a fish! Now, when you think tuna, you might imagine tins stacked up on the supermarket shelves. But today, SBT is far too valuable to be found in cans. Bluefin tuna is destined for Japan's lucrative sashimi market. Served raw, the dish is not only an iconic delicacy, but an important part of their culture and identity. Japan consumes over 80% of the world's bluefin, and a single tuna can sell for tens of thousands. Today, the industry is worth more than $100 million in Australia alone, and its growing popularity, especially in Japan, has continued to put tremendous pressure on the fishery. So what is the Southern Bluefin Tuna fishery? Well, it's everyone that's involved, from the fishermen to the scientists and the government authorities. The bluefin hasn't always been such a high-value species. In fact, it's come a long way since a government survey led by the CSIRO inspired South Australia's fishing and canning boom of the 60s and 70s that first brought canned tuna to Aussie families. In my dad's generation, the bluefin were bountiful. There was never any consideration to stocks depleting. But they did, and they plummeted down. Tuna stocks dropped to as little as 5.5% of the species' original volume, otherwise known as biomass. By the early 90s, the southern bluefin tuna was on the road to extinction. The damage had already been done, and no one realised it.
It was a disaster zone.
Most of us were in receivership.
The banks were foreclosing.
We were actually fishing this fishery hard at both ends. It was kill everything, basically. It began by 1983 to collapse.
Not respecting the fish.
Certain countries were catching more than they should have.
And the fishery was decimated.
What was really going on?
The southern bluefin tuna has had a checkered history. As a kid, I never saw one. Instead, I had to live off the old man's tales of the tuna that would never run out. But you know what? They did, and they vanished. But then, a decade ago, they reappeared right here off the shipwreck coast in Victoria. Where did these tuna come from? Where had the tuna originally gone? And what is the future of the southern bluefin tuna? The southern bluefin tuna has had a really turbulent history. And when it comes to finding the facts from the fiction, it can be hard at times. But if there's one person that knows, that's Glenn Hurry. Glenn Hurry is the ex-CEO of Australian Fisheries Management Authority, and we're heading out to the bush to find him, because he's retired these days, spending more time with sheep than tuna. Professor Glenn Hurry dedicated a large part of his career to the management of commercial fisheries. Not only was he instrumental in representing Australian fishing interests, but his intervention might just have saved the southern bluefin tuna from extinction.
The early days of this fishery, Al, go back to the development of the Japanese fleet back in the early 1950s, and as they expanded out onto the high seas, southern bluefin tuna was one of the ones that they actually targeted. And the biggest catches I think the Japanese made in this fishery, one year they took about 81,000 tonnes in the late 60s, early 70s, and then later on Australia, as it ramped up its catch, I think the peak of our catch was about 21,000 tonnes, and there's no one country that was at fault at this. It was actually both of us. We were actually fishing this fishery hard at both ends, and it began by 1983 to collapse.
Naturally, tuna don't recognise borders, and they will travel through numerous international jurisdictions throughout their lifetime. While the Japanese were targeting the mature fish spawning near Java, the Australian fleet was intercepting juveniles on their migration south, burning the proverbial candle at both ends. Managing a fishery of this scale would take international cooperation. Enter the Commission for the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna.
After 1983, the three main catching countries, Australia, Japan and New Zealand, began to cooperate to manage the fish and slowly ratchet down the quota to a more sustainable level. And what was sustainable we didn't know until we actually got it down, and we ended up settling on 11,750 tonnes with quite a bit of justification with what we knew about the catch patterns in the fishery at that stage that would lead to a recovery in the stock. So not only could we fish it at that level, but the stock should recover.
But the stocks didn't recover. In fact, their numbers kept falling and falling.
It wasn't until, I think it was about mid-2004, Brian Jeffries and I were sitting in a meeting in Canberra with Ray Hillborn, who was one of the top American scientists who was actually appointed to this commission, and Ray asked us out of the blue, how many fish are you stealing out of this fishery? And we thought, you know, why ask us? Our records are actually pretty good. We don't think we're stealing anything out of it at all. And I said to him, well, why are you asking? And he said, well, tuna models don't work this way. He said, somebody's taking a large chunk of fish out of this fishery that we can't account for.
Despite all the data predicting a recovery, the SBT biomass remained in free fall. In 2004, with the industry on the verge of collapse and the species on the brink of commercial extinction, Glenhurry led an Australian team determined to figure out what was going wrong before it was too late.
We sent Ryan Jeffries and a guy called Jim Fitzgerald up to Japan to begin to have a look at markets and the flow of fish through markets. And in effect, what we started to do was look at all the sources that bluefin tuna was being sold through Japan. They looked at these figures and started to add them up, and James says, there's something wrong here, this just doesn't add up. He said, there are fish in here that just shouldn't be there. There's just too many fish actually on the market generally. And we brought these reports back to Australia and we're having a talk about them, and still nobody believed that this was going on.
All the signs pointed to a Japanese overcatch, but they denied the numbers. So Glenhurry gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. Not only was he willing to let a Japanese auditor review the figures, but Australia would foot the $1 million bill. The report confirmed Japan had been overfishing, with estimates as high as 178,000 tonnes over 20 years.
That was probably the thing that began to sort the figures out on the market, because once we began to count fish, we began to discover that there was an overcatch, and the overcatch had been long-term. And it actually went back to 1994 when we took the final reduction to rebuild the fishery, and Japanese industry just couldn't basically take it. So, I mean, in a way, you shouldn't justify the fact that they didn't do the right thing, but you can actually see all the reasons that caused it.
Glenn's dogged detective work and swift action could have saved more than the tuna. The bold move to keep the fishery open but regulated meant they could also keep funding vital research. And it wasn't just the tuna under threat. Losing this predator from the top of the food chain could have led to an ecological disaster on a massive scale. Solving the crisis had become a global issue. So I've come to meet Glenn Sant from wildlife trade monitoring organisation Traffic. Based in Wollongong, he heads up their global program on fisheries management.
If you're a country that signs up to an international agreement and you say that you will abide by that responsibility to manage within the quotas that you've been allocated, you need to do that. And if you don't, there needs to be something to come back on you. Some people think that you need to shut down the fisheries straight away. Some people think that you should keep it completely open and see what happens in the longer term. Our view is that somewhere in there is a balance that we look at working across with all stakeholders and look at, OK, well, our main goal is to get it back to a biologically safe stock level as soon as we can, but you need to reflect everybody's interests in terms of, well, how can everybody have a fair share, but at the same time reflect that nobody will have any share if it just remains over-harvested.
The once thriving industry was in serious trouble. Canneries were closing and the southern bluefin tuna stocks had depleted. To survive, the Australian industry would have to innovate. Port Lincoln, South Australia, was home to the fishing boom of the 60s and 70s. And as the seafood capital of Australia, this community was hit hard by the ever-dwindling catch. I've come to meet Brian Jeffries, who not only played a key role in the Japan investigation, but what he and this small town achieved was truly remarkable.
I was only recruited actually when the quota was cut to 70%. Port Lincoln was a disaster zone. The banks were foreclosing, people were in receivership. We realised the only way to stave off the banks was to actually develop something very innovative, value-adding and whatever it may be. Now, tuna farming was the concept. We wrote the book, but some of us never believed it could really work.
No one had ever ranched wild southern bluefin tuna before. This is an apex predator that must swim roughly its body length every 3 seconds to survive. But with the support of the Fisheries Research Development Corporation, the people of Port Lincoln devised a way to essentially farm fish free range. The ingenious solution was to net young tuna in the open ocean and then tow them inshore and transfer them into specially designed pens, where they'll grow for about 6 months before going to market.
As innovative as people are, as a matter of survival, we used to say that nothing focuses the mind like receivership. You know, you have to get your way out of it. These are proud people, and somehow we got enough will in the system to actually develop and go ahead with this concept. But some of these people here, like some people in other areas of Australia, regional areas, they've got a remarkable capacity for bush engineering.
It's 4:30 in the morning down here at Port Lincoln, and that's when they start. So what they're doing is loading up all the pilchards to go and feed the tuna in the farms. The logistics involved just with feeding tuna are massive. You know, you've got tons and tons of bait, which you've got to catch as well. And then you've got to take it out and feed the tuna. And they're doing it every single day. Because tuna eat, I think it's 1/3 of their body mass or something daily. That's a lot of pilchards, or sardines as they call them. At the end of the day, you're not just feeding the tuna, you've got to feed the tuna the right stuff so they taste right. It's no different from a cow in a paddock, you know, that if they eat the right grass, they taste better. So you can't just feed them any old stuff. You've got to feed them high-grade bait, which gives them the better protein, which makes them taste nicer. But it's a mission just to feed them. Look at it.
I'll show you how we used to do it, and then you can have a go as well.
Oh, seriously?
A little bit of, yeah, with the shovel, mate. Give it a bit of a flick.
I see, spread it right out.
Spread it out, now it's your shot, mate. You give it a go.
I knew this wasn't that easy.
So give it a bit of a flick at the end, and you should get a bit of a spread. That wasn't a flick. Try again. There you go. That's better. Better? Yeah. You've done well. That's breakfast.
And they've got to do it again and again.
Yeah, that's all good.
Another classic example of these guys' ingenuity is the spinner feeder, developed right here in Port Lincoln. Cycling seawater through a high-pressure pump, it feeds through the spinning feeders, dispersing the pilchards evenly into the pen. What took hours of back-breaking hard work now takes just minutes. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of hungry tuna in there. This ingenious system of ranching not only keeps the business profitable, but it reduces stress on the fish. They appear to be completely relaxed swimming around. But farming the fish would also have unexpected benefits for the fishermen.
When the quota come into place and we started farming, it made it a lot easier because I say to my crew, we start on the 16th as catching and the towboats go out on the 6th of January. So it gives the families Christmas, New Year home and Easter, they're home. So it's a sort of a lot better than sleeping out there at Christmas and New Year, scared that someone else might catch the fish if you go home. And in 1996, we started ranching in Croatia, and then the whole Mediterranean started, and then Mexico jumped in on board, and then there was a lot more fish all going to Japan. Port Lincoln, how we did it, we did work together. So we're all innovators in the sense.
What I'm really amazed by is seeing all these tuna is how relaxed they are in the pen. You know, they're wild fish, all their life they're swimming, but now in a pen they seem totally relaxed. But seeing it from the surface is one thing, getting in and getting up close and personal, that's a whole new experience. I've always wanted to swim with huge bluefin, but to actually get in and see these huge fish up close brings it to a whole new level. Perfectly streamlined, they swim effortlessly. That huge eye watching me intently. They are the perfect pelagic predator, built for life in the Southern Ocean. Oh man, that is amazing. Those tuna, seeing them swim around, they're totally relaxed. The whole time, just cruising around. Probably a little bit concerned about the camo whales swimming with them, but amazing. We've come a long way since the days of poling tuna. Thanks to effective management and reliable science, there's been a growing sense of cooperation within the SBT fishery and a growing confidence that together we could save the southern bluefin tuna. That's led to a lot of change. And to see it in action, I've come to meet professional longliner Shane Ralph. Shane, how are you, mate?
G'day, Al. Welcome aboard, mate. Come in.
Bring it on. Get my bag, all my clothes.
Chuck that somewhere for you.
Let's go fishing. We're heading 60 nautical miles out to sea in search of tuna and don't expect to see land for at least a week. Long lining is a long main line suspended by floats with hooks attached.
I've been in the industry, Al, for 33 years now. It's come a long way since I started. We're not actually chasing quantity. It's more of a quality industry, you know. Southern bluefin, you know, the bigger fish, the 50 to 70 kilo fish is what we're chasing.
Commercial fishing is often seen as blindly pillaging the sea. But for fisheries like SBT, it's quite the opposite. Adopting scientific methods has improved efficiency across the board and has even reduced the amount of bycatch for the highly regulated Australian fishery.
We catch a little bit of bycatch, but we've got an AFMA-issued line cutter that we cut it off as close as we can to the hook so it doesn't disturb the fish. They just swim off and the hook rusts out of the mouth. With southern bluefin, we pull the fish on board and then it's cleaned, put in 0 degree brine. So from the time it comes out of the water into the brine, it's chilling within a matter of minutes.
Once caught, the warm-blooded bluefin takes about 6 hours to cool down. So you need to process the fish and put it on ice as soon as possible. Otherwise, the internal heat they generate will spoil the meat.
Quality's the key. Bleed the fish, kill it instantly and get it on ice, and that keeps it in the best quality.
Looking after the catch is not only more respectful, but it also ensures premium quality. That's why it's become so valuable. These tuna are processed in a matter of minutes and then straight into an ice slurry, ready to air freight to Japan.
Within 24 hours, they're normally over in Japan.
It's a big business and Big Brother is always watching.
The SBT's heavily regulated. We used to have observers that watched and monitored everything, but now we have 4 cameras on the vessel that watch us 24/7 while we're working. We have a vessel monitoring system which the government can see where the boat is 24/7. When we catch the fish, it's got to be tagged. That way the government can trace the fish. You can follow it every step of the way, from the time it was caught to the time that it goes to Japan.
Scientists and commercial fishers haven't always gotten along, but today they're working closely together as they realise the importance of cooperation to ensure a sustainable and profitable fishery.
If you haven't got people catching fish, you can't collect data. There's a lot of data that comes out of our catch. You've got to keep fishing it to find out what the stocks are doing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a clue.
My journey of discovery for the southern bluefin tuna has led me to Hobart in Tasmania, because if there's one thing I've learned that's critical to looking after this species is the science. The science has to be impeccable. And CSIRO down here in Hobart are doing some groundbreaking research that is proving critical to looking after these fish. To learn more, I've come to meet CSIRO's Senior Principal Research Scientist, Campbell Davies, and Principal Research Scientist, Richard Hillary, who has spent a lifetime studying the southern bluefin tuna.
Basically, if you want to be working on tuna and specifically pelagic-related research, to my mind, this has been the best place in the world. And equally, the bluefins are probably the most captivating and interesting of all the species in terms of their migration, their life history. It's definitely the most interesting species to work on.
Hillary's work has focused on estimating the SPT population through a close kin mark recapture model.
If you randomly sample two punters on the street, the chances of them being related are much higher if you're in a small town, and they're much smaller if you're in a big city like Sydney. It's essentially saying that you're much less likely to be related if you come from a bigger population. And what it really does is take that idea and expands it out to say, well, how will we actually apply that in the real world where things change, where animals get better at breeding when they get bigger and they move around, but it's using that really same simple idea.
An exciting new development uses the tuna's unique genetic fingerprint to tag and then identify recaptured fish. This gene tagging is providing more reliable data than conventional tag and release programs.
So when we first looked into this back in 2008, 2009, just the logistics of handling DNA processing was such that it was too expensive to be comparable to, say, conventional tagging. Most genetic studies might use 100, 200, 300 samples of fish, but handling tens of thousands of samples is pretty new. And so we now have robots that are used in medicine and cancer research and those sort of things that are being used to both increase the processing speed for the DNA extractions, but also ensure that the quality control about the data itself is high enough for when you're managing a program for a large international fishery.
These new methods will help to monitor the effectiveness of the fisheries rebuilding plan and will be included in the development of a new management procedure.
Management procedure is a slightly different way of managing a stock. So previously in the past, it's been done via stock assessment, people sitting in a room and saying, we think this is a sustainable catch, we're going to go with that. What a management procedure does is take away the discussion side of things. It says, we have this data that goes into this model, and out of that comes this quota. And that gets rigorously tested using a lot of mathematical models. So it removes the human decision-making process really, or shall we say the argument process really, from setting quotas. And that's what SBT has been doing since 2011.
Quality in the Australian scientific, particularly fisheries research, and it's quite amazed us. It's almost awesome what's been, and you go to a lot of international conferences, and the Australian technology of a close kin now, and now gene tagging and things like that has just been copied worldwide. But also, one good side effect for me is it's made the fishers themselves really respect the scientists more, and that you know, we're all working together on the same page now.
The story of the southern bluefin is as complex as the fish is unique. Proper management of the fishery has increased southern bluefin numbers and a rise in weekend anglers catching the big fish. That's why the recreational sector has such an important role to play in this story, and why I've come to meet Brett Cleary from the Game Fishing Association of Australia.
Australians love to fish, and the role of people like me and all of the associations is to protect the fishing grounds and to protect the fish. When there was a major decline in the SBT fishery, there was a management came in, CCSBT came in and started to manage the fishery. But at that stage, it had declined so badly that there was very little recreational catch. So when they were deciding on the resource sharing arrangements, the recreational sector was just left out. With the recovery and the increase in recreational angling, there is potential for recreational anglers to have an impact on the stock. It's very important for recreational anglers to be very good stewards of the fishery. We can't have people that are not respecting the fish and not respecting the resource.
The New South Wales Game Fish Tagging Program began in 1973. With nearly 500,000 fish tagged, it's the largest in the world. And with over 25,000 SBT tags so far, Aussie anglers are true tuna champions. Once caught, capture details such as date, location and length are recorded on the cards provided. The corresponding tag is attached directly under the second dorsal fin before the fish is released to fight another day. Adding to the data collected by the commercial sector, recreational anglers are also contributing to the scientific research. Of course, for the scientists, tagging is far more high-tech. So I've come to meet Dr. Sean Tracy at IMAS, Tasmania's Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies.
So we've seen a real change in mindset from the recreational fishery. 20 years ago, it was very much about harvesting the fish and taking it home. Not a lot of thought about the impacts of recreational fishing. And at the time with the Southern Bluefin Tuna fishery, that may have been okay because it was only a fairly small niche fishery. But over the last 20 years, as we've seen the stock recover, we're seeing a lot more bluefin being taken by the recreational sector. So that working in with them with the satellite tagging project has been amazing and allowed us to actually tag 60 individual fish.
I had the opportunity to assist Sean in catching and satellite tagging southern bluefin tuna. Each sat tag costs an average of $6,000, so this is some serious science. Data collected from the sat tags is analysed at IMAS headquarters, here at the University of Tasmania. So this is the mapping showing where all the sat tags, that's obviously all of them together, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is the 60 fish that we've tagged with the recreational sector. We're tagging in different areas to what had been done with the commercial fishery. So working in with them and getting the tags on, we're actually seeing a whole new sort of avenue of where these fish are actually moving and migrating. We're at the point now where we're trying to really engage with the community, both the recreational sector and the commercial sector, to get some of this information out and also learn from each other. The commercial fishery go to lengths to make sure that the fish that they handle are in absolute prime condition. Commercial guys have known this for years, that if they treat the fish well, they're going to get a top quality product. And now we can actually learn from the commercial sector in the recreational sector and apply the same methods.
Yeah, so it's not taking home lots of fish, it's taking home one fish or two fish and making them perfect. And, you know, just really looking after them, because then you get that beautiful meat.
So one of the big things that we're seeing is you know, the real willingness within the recreational sector to be champions for this species. So really improving their stewardship, they're getting involved in the research. They want to know more, they want to know what they can do better to look after the species. And ultimately that reduces wastage, which is a really important thing in this iconic species.
I think one of the areas we can get better is getting that ethos out to the general community, people that aren't members of clubs, educate those people on release methods and also looking after the fish if you do decide to keep it. Recreational fishing and Indigenous fishing is now recognised in the Fisheries Management Act, but along with that comes responsibility. We need to be part of the stock rebuilding. We should be actively involved in making sure that SBT continue to recover and that there's more fish in the future.
Tasmania is home to world-leading research into southern bluefin tuna. I've actually been coming here to fish for tuna ever since their numbers returned a decade ago. And I can't wait to get out on the water. Lockie, how are you, mate?
Yeah, good to see you, mate.
Bluefin time. Take me out and catch me one.
Let's do it.
Let's see what it's all about. Of course, not everyone has access to their own boat, so charter vessels play an important role in the recreational fishing community. It's amazing down here in Tassie how close you fish to shore when you're chasing bluefin. And we're not talking just little one, we're talking fish up to 150 kilos. And they're right in close to the rocks. If you went up to New South Wales you'd be fishing 30, 40 miles offshore, but down here, seems to be the closer the better. I won't lie, it can get pretty cold out in the water. But when you hear that reel scream, there's nothing quite like it.
We're going to show you a new dance move now. It's called the Tuna Shuffle.
The Tuna Shuffle.
You've got to go around everyone.
Yeah. I had him up there before. Trying to get him as quick as I can. Ah, come on.
Surely this time, Al, surely.
Yeah, I've already gone through the knot. Come on.
Oh yeah, good fish too.
That is a pretty fish, isn't it? You know the best part? We'll do our bit and we'll let him go. There you go, I'll let you let him go.
Off like a rocket, eh?
How good is the backdrop though? That's what I sit there just look at that going. I get distracted. The fishing was non-stop. We couldn't keep a lure in the water for more than a minute. It is amazing how heavy these fish are. Like, they're not even that big, but the weight in a fish this size.
Yep.
And you know what? When you take home a fish this size, like we'll take one home, that's going to feed everyone on this boat.
Exactly.
And we can let this guy go so that he can go and grow and turn into a barrel.
That's it, that's what we want.
All right, here we go. All right, my friend, they are absolutely scooped. You've got to look after them, don't you? As a charter skipper, that's probably the biggest thing, isn't it? The guys take home their 4 fish. But if you process a fish the size of that,
yep,
that's a bloody big fish.
Well, there's 10 kilos of meat in that one fish there.
Yeah, and you've got to look after it, isn't it? So you've got to bleed it, ice it, and I don't know if you need to ice it in Tasmania. It's pretty cold
Come on
there. So, Stu, how much has it changed down here at Eagle Hawk now?
Yeah, it really has changed. I've been doing this 20 years. Early on, you know, I'd catch an odd bluefin here and there, but 12, 14 years ago, it started to improve and improve and improve. And, you know, a couple of years ago, I released over 1,000 in a season. I never, ever thought I'd get 1,000 in a season. It was incredible.
How have you seen that the attitude for the anglers has changed, or I suppose matured almost?
Yeah, it certainly has a lot. You know, a lot of people love releasing fish now. A lot of people don't get any fish. You know, they're more than happy just to release everything. They just love catching them, love the fight, let them go, catch them again another day. It really has changed. Back in the early days, it was kill everything, basically.
Yeah.
And now it's, you know, you take an odd one for a feed, but yeah, release the majority.
You've been doing it for 20 years now, and now Lockie, your son's, following in your footsteps. He might be following you around a few times, but he's actually doing it as well,
Yeah,
and fishing
funny,
side
really.
by side,
Yeah,
you know?
it's fantastic to have the family out there.
And for me, like, if you think 20 years ago, and you know, someone would be going, oh, your kids will be doing it side by side, you'd be going, oh, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that's one thing that's amazing, that these bluefin have come back, and now it's not just you, it's now the whole family, the whole town's evolving from it, and they're just getting better and better.
Well, the town thrives on it. You know, this time of year, there's no tourists around really, but we've got all the fishermen here staying at the pub and buying food at the shop and at the service station buying fuel. So, you know, it all adds to the economy of the area. It's fantastic.
How do you see the future now?
Well, I see the numbers just getting better and better on the bluefin. You know, they're pretty well managed now, and it just seems to be increasing year after year. You know, like we say, we're getting these mixed sizes now. The big jumbo tuna, we seem to get a lot of them every year. You know, I added up my diary the other day. I was keen to know how many barrels or jumbos I'd caught in my time, and yeah, I'm sitting on 91 at the moment. So
serious, 91?
I'm hoping to crack 100 this year. If not this year, certainly next.
And you know the best part? You got 2 more boys there, so there's going to be 2 more boats running at the rate we're going now if these bluefin keep going.
And my little daughter, she's super keen too. My 8-year-old, she's saying, when can I come a sticky?
It is absolutely amazing how much these bluefin travel. We've just got word they're here off Sydney. Now, when I dived in South Australia, they were 30 kilo fish. The ones up here have grown. They're now 70, 80, 90, over 100 kilos, some of them. And if there's one thing I would love to do, it's dive with wild bluefin. That's a dream. What is really interesting is the age class of the fish off New South Wales is completely different from the tuna off Victoria and South Australia. They seem to bypass the southern states on their journey, and we're still not sure where they actually go. The opportunity to jump in with them in the wild gives me a whole new appreciation of this incredible species. It's a great reminder why it's so important to educate everyone to respect this valuable resource. The story of the Southern Bluefin Tuna and its remarkable recovery is an inspiring one.
I think bluefin, particularly Al, is a good story, and I think we're beginning to see the results in the field now. And both the commercial and the recreational industries are seeing benefits, not just our industry, but Japan and Taiwan and others who are catching these fish.
I see it as very positive. I think there's probably a number of things that interlink that will hopefully make this a positive story keep going, in the sense that we've got now a solid measure of how to estimate how many adults there are, and there's an evidence-based way to set the quotas. And I think when you've got those two things in place, it should be a positive story.
If we look after it, not just us Australians, but the whole SBT community worldwide, of course it's going to improve, and improves very rapidly.
This fish is a gift, and it's a gift of nature. It's a gift of just hard work by past generations or whatever it may be. It's a magnificent fish. It's will have a global demand, not just in Japan. It's now expanding in China and Korea. Australia has an international duty of care here. It's not just looking after Port Lincoln's interests or the community's interests. It's really an international duty of care, and that's what needs to be looked at all the time.
I've been speaking to everyone involved, the scientists in the lab, the commercial fishers, environmentalists and recreational anglers. I've seen everyone in the SBT community played their own unique and equally important role.
But we're not out of the woods yet. We need to focus where we all take responsibility in terms of thinking, OK, from the managers to the commercial catchers, to the recreational catchers, the charter boat operators, the consumers, everybody has to take responsibility.
The devastation that began in the 60s seemed almost unrepairable, especially when stocks bottomed out at just 5.5%. But thanks to cooperation across the SBT community, 2017 figures show the population has climbed to 13%, and it's still going up.
I feel a lot more confident that we're getting there in terms of we've built up this jigsaw of what we need with management, what we need to have in terms of international agreement, what we need to have in terms of stakeholders within Australia participating in how we go forward. But it's no time to rest on our laurels. It'll only take one of those pieces of the jigsaw to fall out, and we may be in the same perilous position we were in 10, 20 years ago. So we need to keep managing it together with this shared responsibility around the end target, which is a sustainable legal fishery.
But I suppose the one thing that stuck with me with bluefin tuna was that you've got to save the fishery in order to save the fish, and it was no use us closing our fishery and letting other partners fish in this fishery on the high seas and us have a limited say in it. And if you take your bat and ball and go home and you don't want to participate in the commission anymore, then you actually deal yourself out of the fishery. So you have to actually stay engaged, and you have to participate. Industry won't go away, but you'll save it by coming up with a responsible way of managing the fishery, but also saving the industry as well.
Of course, that industry is part of the community that continues to fund research and collect data that's so critical to the species' survival. So in a very real sense, fishing has saved the southern bluefin tuna. In fact, this is turning into one of the biggest success stories of the open ocean. And you know what? It couldn't come at a better time. The story of the southern bluefin tuna is setting a whole new precedent in how we manage global fisheries. But this journey is far from complete. And if there's one thing we can all take away from it, is that we're all part of the solution. We all need to be tuna champions, and we all need to keep this momentum going. Alrighty, boys, time to go fishing. I may have never got the opportunity to catch a southern bluefin tuna with my dad. And you know what? It certainly wasn't through a lack of trying. But I'm excited because I do get to do it with my kids, with the next generation. Not just for tomorrow, but for the future. So let's go fishing.
Let's go.